Hello and good evening. I am Dr. O, and welcome to Healthcaring Differently, where we inspire diverse students to explore careers in healthcare. Tune in every Tuesday, just like this, at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and follow us on social media on like all of our social media platforms so that you can stay in the loop, gain valuable resources, and hear more about our next stream. Now, the other thing we want you to make sure you do is sign up for our newsletter. These evening sessions are sessions for inspiration, but the newsletter is an opportunity for information. That's how you get plugged in for diversity programs, scholarships, and research opportunities for students. So please do sign up for the newsletter at healthcaringdifferently.com. But for tonight, please remember, feel free to drop your questions for our guest in the chat during this session, and I'll make sure to ask them on your behalf. All right, so tonight, our guest is Dr. Nadine Persaud. She is the executive director of the Kensington Hospice and has been working in the hospice and palliative care field for the past 18 years. Dr. Persaud received her Bachelor of Social Work and minor in psychology at Toronto Metropolitan University. And then she did her Master's of Social Work at York University and her PhD in palliative care at Lancaster University. One of her research interests is making palliative care equitable and accessible to those who are structurally vulnerable. Welcome, Dr. Persaud.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
No, it is a pleasure. And we've been trying to coordinate this for quite a few months because I really wanted to have you on to bring like your perspective, but also your journey, because I'm intentional about making sure that we have guests who some guests who have a medical background, but some who might be coming from like a social work background like yourself or nursing background, because it's so important to have that kind of diversity of healthcare perspectives, and for our young folks to see leaders who have different paths. So I'm going to jump right into it because we've only got like 30 minutes. I'm going to dive, nosedive right into the first question. My usual question, which is how, Dr. Prasad, how are you healthcaring differently?
I put a lot of thought into this question. I think it's such a beautiful question because we're never asked that in healthcare. It's just like, you're just expected to do roles and do different things, but it's never asked, how are you doing things differently? And I thought about this in so many ways. And I think, I think when I think of healthcare and my years of it in healthcare, I think we're so good at having acronyms and buzzwords and
Yes.
slogans and mission statements and values, and they're always up on a wall. But I strive to ensure that we live by what we say. So a
Mm-hmm.
mission statement has to be entrenched in our actions. It can't just be something that we say, right now all you hear is like everybody talking about equity. And I guarantee if you ask those people what equity is, they will say everybody gets treated the same,
Oof. Thank
right?
Thank you for saying that. It actually bothers me when people are like, oh no, we can't do that for this one group that's vulnerable. We need to treat people equitably. And I'm like, no, you mean equally. Equity would mean actually doing something special for this vulnerable group. Thank you for saying that.
Right. And then after I sit there and like I cringe a little bit, but I'm like, people don't know what they don't know. So then they think that, you know what, like I am doing something. And I think I'm health caring differently by ensuring that we live by equity, that people get treated the way they would like to be treated, that we change this this whole narrative of everybody deserves equal access to everybody deserves access based on where they are.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important to me. And I think I often think like everybody says, oh, let's think outside of the box. Like lately I've been saying, let's get rid of the box. Like, why is there even a box?
Oh, I love it.
Right? Like, why do we even have to have a box? Because half of the time when people tell me they're thinking outside of the box, they're not. They're not. I'm like, no, you're not. You're not thinking outside of the box. You're still within the box, just a corner of the box. But I say, get rid of the box. Like, it's the box that
Recycle
confines
the box.
us.
Get rid of the box.
Right?
I love it.
Yeah, at least recycle it. But it's the box that confines us. And I think, when we think of like seniors care, we think of legislation. And we think of long-term care, it's so highly regulated in Ontario, right?
Yes.
Do I think regulation is
Regulation.
important? Yes. But do I think regulations made a big difference during the COVID-19 pandemic? No. So I think they're important, but how do we think outside of the box? How do we look into the gray area to really do things differently? To sometimes put us into our comfort zone where you're uncomfortable, which is, I think, where many of us need to sit in order for there to be change. And I think a lot of the work that I do is being uncomfortable and making others feel uncomfortable so that they're forced to want to change and do things differently.
Yes. No, I love that. Yes, just getting rid of that box and really doing like walking the talk, right? Like it's
Mhm.
you're saying it's on the wall, but we're gonna walk that talk. Um, and so I'm actually seeing a comment that's coming from Instagram, which is Lilani Learns said they missed the mark on the equity comment. Yes, exactly. So lots
Yeah.
of people miss the mark, but I think more than the comment, it's exactly what you're saying. It's the actions, right?
Mhm.
Making sure that the actions match what's like on the wall. And like your journey is different. I mean, everybody's journey is different, but part of why I bring people to this show to talk about how they're health caring differently is because of our diverse identities, but also our different paths. And then we bring that into our field so that we can bring a different perspective, right? One where like the saying that I say is I'm not struggling to think outside the box. I was born outside the box. Like
Oh, I
I was
love
never in
that.
the box. I
I
was never
love
in the box,
that.
right? So thank you. So yeah, what about you? Like what was your journey or how do you self-identify? Like how does all of this come together for you to be able to bring that lens to your leadership?
I think that in order for you to understand what it means to be equitable, you have to understand what it means to not have access to something or to be treated differently because of the way you look or the color of your skin or your gender. And I think once you experience some of that, it makes you recognize the need for us to do better. And I
Mm.
think, being a woman of color, we face these experiences. I face these experiences every single day where it's like, like we have to address this head on and we can't just like hide from it. And like a lot of people like to dance around it and it's often an elephant in the room. But it's like, no, if we could address it on and be like, my lived experience has informed my ability to not be born in the box or think outside of the box or recycle the box. People tend to want to hear from you more because they're like, oh, you're not just a soapbox. You're not just saying this because it's the right thing to say. You're not just doing this because you're on a bandwagon. Like you've lived this, you've experienced it. And I think it's so important.
No, I think that's so I mean I absolutely agree with what you're saying because that's part of the lens I'm using in health caring differently. We're different and we approach it differently, right? And so it that difference comes from what you're describing. It's experiencing some form of exclusion of, or oppression and not being part of the dominant group, right? In some way. And so that as you said can be an advantage and sometimes it can be a challenge, right? So I'm wondering for you on your path from you did your bachelor's and your master's and then the PhD in palliative care, which is actually cool and unique to do a PhD in that area. What challenges did you have to come, prior to, your PhD or during or after? Like, what kind of challenges did you face, especially being different or as a woman of color?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, such a beautiful question. When I feel like the healthcare system sometimes sets it, or the education system sometimes sets us up for a little bit of failure because they make you feel like you're going to get out there, you're going to change the world, you're going to make a difference, you're going to change people's lives. Like honestly, when I started university, I was 17 and they asked me, "Why do you want to do social work?" And I was like, "Cuz I want to change people's life. I want to make a difference." And then you go to school and you learn all this theory and you're so excited and then you get into the real world and you're ready to integrate theory with practice and you're like whoa, and you're hit by racism and sexism and ableism and all these things and you're like, oh my gosh, colonialism, all these things exist, and you're like, I didn't really learn about this. Like I didn't realize that all of these like structural vulnerabilities and the social determinants of health, all of these things are going to intersect with your ability to make any change. So when
Mhm.
I finished my undergrad, I was 22 years old and I was so excited. And I was like ready to just get into hospice care. And There was very few hospice jobs. So I'm not even joking. I probably went and I had it like my cousin and my uncle, they used to drive me, wait in the car. I'd run in for an interview and I'd come out and say, I don't think I got it. And I probably did that upwards of like 30, 40 times and nobody would hire me. Nobody would hire me. And my uncle, who is is into IT and like has had this really big business job, goes to me, Nadine, well, what do you look like when you're going for these interviews? Then I'm like, I'm wearing a suit and I'm wearing heels and my hair is down. And he's like, okay, skip the suit, take off the suit jacket, put your hair in a ponytail, and don't wear heels. Wear lower shoes. I got 3 jobs in 1 week.
What?
Yeah. And I sat there thinking, like, how is this happening? I remember one of my employers said, Nadine, like, what's your biggest challenge? And I said, nobody will give me a chance. And that was my first hospice job. And I remember like Juliet and Anna Marie looked at me and they're like, we're going to give you that chance. And after that, I just started getting these jobs. And I thought like people were judging me on the way that I looked. They were looking at like the clothes I was wearing, my hair, my heels. And they were like, oh, here's this young girl coming in here, some fashionista. And they were like not even giving me the time of day. And I remember that experience and I remember being so sad. And like I was like, you know what? No one is in healthcare is hiring me. So I'm just gonna go and give my resume to like Louis Vuitton and like Chanel. Cause if they're not gonna hire me, I might as well get a job at a place like that where I can get a discount and maybe they'll hire
Love
me.
it.
They didn't. But my point is that sometimes even before you open your mouth you don't get what you want, or you're not going to get that job, or you're not going to get into that program because of who you are, the way you look and the way people perceive you. And I think I faced that really early on in my career, and I started to be more cognizant of it. And then as I went through my journey, I found that the more you have to be confident. You have to set like you have to be confident in yourself and like be really knowledgeable, because people can sense that when you're not, or else like I'll continuously get, are you the student or are you the volunteer? And when you say no, they're like, oh. And I've had people say, how does someone that looks like you get to being so successful? And sometimes I'm like, is it intentional or is it like genuinely asking? And I tend to like think about that a lot. And I found that like the more educated I got and like the more like I got my PhD and stuff, the harder at times it became, because then
Mhm.
people were like, they wouldn't focus on what I was saying. It would focus on she's too strong and she's too direct. And I was like, well, would you say to a white man he's too strong and he's too direct? No. So what's wrong with a woman of color being too strong and direct? Because the last time I checked, it was weak and you're not transparent and you can't be direct. So it wasn't until I did a lot of like Dr. Dasani was like to me, Nadine, do you know what microaggressions of racism are? And I started looking into this. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So I was like, oh my gosh, all this time I've been tone policed.
Yep.
And I started realizing that that's what it was. And now I'm like, I've had people say, Nadine, you're so smart and you're all the way up here and you got to bring yourself down to the normal level and talk to people at normal levels, because no one will ever understand you because you're too strong and direct. And I sit there feeling like, is there something wrong? Like, what am I doing that's not right? And then I started learning about all these things. And I'm like, well, no, it's not me, it's you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, because exactly. They wouldn't say that to like a white man who's a leader and who, you know what I mean, in an institution. But as a woman of color, it's like, oh, okay, there's always something to be wrong. Either you're not speaking eloquently enough or too eloquently. So, no, absolutely. It's important to, as you are, stand in your power, right? Now we've got some questions. We've got some
Oh,
questions. So you're talking about your,
okay.
yes. So we've got YouTube and then Instagram. So on YouTube, Yursky, shout out. Yes, we see you. I've never met Yursky, but Yursky is on here every week. So much
I
love.
love that.
Yursky has asked, is it hard to get a job in palliative or hospice care? Are they different or both fall under senior care? Oh, that's good. Let's talk about actually the different areas and how they can overlap and how they're separate. So do you want to get into that a little bit, like senior care, palliative, hospice?
Sure.
What?
Yeah, I think, I think back like when I started this work, everybody was like, palliative care, like, what is that? Why are you doing that? Nobody wants to work with people who are dying. And now in the healthcare system, palliative care, it's having its moment. And it's like everybody's talking about equity in palliative care. So it's a really special time. Um, And I think that there are many opportunities to either work in palliative care, to volunteer. There's always an opportunity to volunteer in hospice palliative care. Always. We're built on volunteerism. So there's always opportunities to volunteer. I think, when we think of palliative care and we think of hospice care, so palliative care is from the moment you're diagnosed with a life limiting illness and you can still be on curative measures, whereas hospice care is when there's no more treatment and you're moving towards the end of your life. People often think that it's just for people who are seniors, but my PhD is in adolescents and young adults who are dying of cancer because that population dies too. So I think when we think of palliative care and hospice care, it can be implemented with anybody that's living with a life-limiting illness, um, whether they're thinking of curative measures or they're not thinking of curative measures. It can be implemented at any trajectory of illness for any age at any time.
Yeah, and I think that's also a part of it. Like there's the end of life piece, but palliative care can also be around pain management for somebody who's vulnerable who might still find cure. So I think that's the other piece that has changed, that before when people heard the word palliative care, they would perhaps panic and be like, "Oh, you're saying my loved one has 2 weeks left to live and it's about, how to die." But
Mhm.
palliative care is being, I guess, seen a little bit differently, of including that, but also how to be comfortable while you're living. It's a lot about best care, and addressing comfort in life, right? So it's really a really cool area. I think more holistic
Yeah,
than other areas of medicine
totally.
and healthcare. So, okay, so there was that question from Yursky about the differences. So, seniors care doesn't always mean palliative. It can be anybody who's senior, palliative, that being addressing those issues at any point on the journey for a life term, um, more terminal kind of care. And then hospice is how much in a journey towards end of life does hospice care, or does a person usually qualify for hospice care? Let's say.
We usually say less than 3 months.
Okay.
So
So yeah,
less than three
I'll say
months of
that.
life. Yeah.
So we're talking about, and as you said, that can be at any age, because we all experience these types of conditions at any age, not just in seniors. Okay. Oh, we're getting a lot of questions. Okay. I need to be quiet. I need to
Oh
so
gosh.
Amber Claire asks, what led you to palliative care specifically? Social work is such a broad field.
Mhm. So I always knew that I was really I toyed with being a pediatrician in
Oh,
palliative care. And then I thought about, and that's where my mind really was at. And I thought, I'm really interested in the psychosocial aspects of things, the existential stuff, the suffering that is not physical suffering, the emotional suffering, the spiritual suffering, the mental suffering. So I thought social work would be a really unique place for me to get into that. So when I was 15, I had a friend named Frank that we went to elementary school with, and he died suddenly.
oh, I'm sorry.
And when you're 15, you don't have friends that die. And I remember being in high school, and I remember, like, I was the class clown in high school. No one ever thought I'd make it. Trust me. I was like the one that I only cared about making people laugh. Like, I was always the joker. And after he had died, we had went to different high schools, but so many of us all knew each other. People were coming up to me and they're like, Nadine, like, what's wrong? You're so sad. Like, when are you going to be happy again? When are you going to make us laugh? And I started feeling like, yeah, like, when am I going to feel happy again? When am I going to be able to laugh? And I never knew that was called grief. No one
Hmm.
talked about grief and what that meant. And when you're 15, like, no one talked about it. And eventually I grew up and I was like, that was grief that we experienced. And no one at any point said, let's talk about your grief. Let's support you guys. Let's figure out how we move through this. It was just like, you're going to get over it. Time will heal everything. And time didn't. And I remember, like, we were ready to apply for university. And I said, I really just want to understand that better. And when I was looking for a clinical placement, I like put in, they were like, you can't find your own. And I was like, well, nothing you guys have is interesting me. So I went online and like I searched like very sick kids, and hospice came up. And because they had a hospice program for children. And I was like, oh, what's a hospice? So I did a quick search and I called them and I said, listen, I'm not supposed to be calling you, but if I were to tell my school that you guys want to take me as a student, would you do it? And they're like, yeah. So I went and I interviewed and I got a student placement at a hospice. And I've been in hospice care ever since. So I think that my experience of grief so early on with such like a close friend and not having any supports really led me to think like, we live in Canada where we have access to opioids. We know how to manage pain. Pain should not, physical pain should not be a thing. In other places, like, I think of my parents who are Guyanese, or like, in Africa, where there might be like not a lot of access to opioids, whereas we have that. So it's like, but there's so much suffering outside of physical suffering. And I think I saw social work as that path to really help with that non-physical suffering and to address that in a different way.
Oh my gosh, that is so powerful. And that's part of what I call so for many of us in our journeys, there's different forms of challenges that we've had and painful situations. But then when we are able to, I call it transforming pain to purpose, then it's a beautiful thing. And so I feel like your story is a really great example of transforming pain to purpose. So thank you for sharing that. And
I
I just
love that.
Oh, thank you.
So beautiful.
But I hope that helps others, like if folks are struggling with different things, there's ways to be able to channel it over time in a way that helps others. Okay, we got lots of questions, so I'm gonna try to balance them all. So I'm back to YouTube now. And Tulsi T asks, how do you navigate the gravity of the field? How do you bring hope to those around you? Oh my goodness, we have more questions than usual. I'm getting dizzy because they're coming in
I'm
at
like
least
loving it. Is it me? Like,
I think so. I think it's the topic. How do you bring hope to those around you and their families?
this is such a beautiful question. People always say to me, how can you have hope when somebody is dying? And I always say, I give the example. So early on in my career, I supported a 3-year-old who was dying of an inoperable brain tumor. And his mom didn't believe that he had this brain tumor. She's like, no, he just complained of a headache. Like, it's not happening. And
Mm,
eventually, it was happening. And she was trying all these clinical trials at sick kids. And her hope was that he was going to like it was going to help, and he was going to live, and there was going to be a cure. And then eventually things got worse. And I remember, like, one day he was like playing a video game and he starts yelling, "Mom, my hand won't work." And like he was paralyzed on one side because of where the tumor was. And the hope at the beginning of her journey when I had met her was that he would be able to, these curative treatments would work. And then we moved through the trajectory of illness, and it was, well, that he'll be able to play video games. And he still beat me every single time at Mario Kart. And
mhm.
then it moved to that he'll be able to eat. He used to call a peanut butter and jelly sandwich a red sandwich without feeling nausea and without throwing up. And I use that example because it shows the way hope changes as we move through our illness journey. And I think hope is something that we never take away as healthcare providers, and we never give false hope, but we never take away false hope. We maintain whatever hope that family may have. And there's really no link between hope and denial. Hope doesn't mean that you don't accept it. It means that you're holding on to a bigger person larger than yourself. So I think that I follow the hope of whatever it is the family is telling me they have, and we watch that beautiful hope transcend through that illness journey.
Wow. That's so beautiful. It can be painful at the same time, but just so beautiful to look at how, as you said, like hope transforms and you kind of um, move it and move with it over time. And I'm going to combine Yursky and Tulsi T. They both have questions that are interrelated. So, Yursky said, "Is it mentally taxing to work with people during the last moments of their life?" But at the same time, Tulsi T is also asking about supporting your staff, so working with people who serve palliative care patients. So what is that like for you? With does it take a toll after a while, not with the individual patient, but multiple patients and
Mhm.
working that area? And then also, how do you support your staff?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I get asked this often. And I think people sometimes say to me, well, Nadine, like, you've worked in palliative care for so long. Have you become desensitized to death?
Mm,
That gives me the ick. How can you become desensitized to human connection? It's not like, and I always say, like, if you become desensitized, then you no longer should be in the field.
mm,
My whole premise of my master's was built on, in order for a candle to stay lit, something has to burn. And I
mhm.
attribute us as the ones that burn little. You do this too, little by little by little, we burn because we strive every day to ensure the people that we serve shine as bright as they can.
I love that.
And the hope is that you don't get down to your wick. The hope is that you can maintain that brightness to others, but not lose your own. And I think for me, like, it's really about how do you, you can't go from vacation to burnout and vacation to burnout because you're running from the thing that's burning you out. You have to find ways of dealing with the day-to-day challenges that we deal with. So wherever I work, I always have a me space.
Mm.
And anytime someone sees me outside, where I work right now, it's a bench right outside. And anytime someone sees me sitting there, it could be the dead of winter and I'm sitting on that, people know, oh, she's in her me space. And it's a time for me to disconnect. It means that I need to kind of recalibrate myself to go back in and be authentic and be the person I need, the people that I serve and the people that I lead, who I need to be for them. And I think it's so important. And in in my dissertation, a story came up of like, or I'll share another one. One time I was at a woman's house and we were sharing this really beautiful moment, and she was living with end stage cancer. And a few weeks later, I got a call from the physician saying, Nadine, you have to go in. This woman's actively dying, and we have no idea what her advanced care plans are. We don't know if she wants to die at home, if she wants to go into hospice. So I go into her house, and I'm sitting with her sister in the living room. And I'm like, where is she? And she's like, oh, she's up in her bedroom. So I go up into her bedroom, and she's in a wheelchair, and it's obvious that she's moving towards the end of life. And she goes to me, I really want to go outside to feel the sun on my face because this is what matters at the end of life, the mundane things that we all take for granted. And I thought, okay, well, if you can, like, if you could stand on your feet, if you can weight bear, I can help you down the stairs. And she's like, she tried and she couldn't. And we took her back into her room. We opened up all the windows. And as we're sitting there, her sister brought me a glass of bright red juice, and she brought her a glass of hot water and lemon. And before I could drink it, her sister said, "Oh," the patient goes to me, "Oh, what is that?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I think it's fruit juice." And she's like, "I would love to drink it." And I was like, "Oh, do you want some?" And she's like, "Oh, no, no, I'm not allowed to drink that." And I thought, this definitely is not us or our team, because I'm the girl that when a man was dying of liver cirrhosis, I was doing his mouth care with whiskey because that's what he wanted. So I'm like,
Right.
I'm always, you're dying, eat, drink, do whatever you
Whatever
want.
you want. Yeah.
So
It's your moment.
right? So I go downstairs, and this goes back to our what we talked about before about hope and the family. I go to the sister, "Can she drink this?" And her sister's like, "Oh no, that she's going to die faster because it has too many preservatives." So I thought, this wasn't like my Nadine moment to talk about she's not going to die faster. And it wasn't my time to take away that false hope. It was my time to maintain that hope, but also figure out how I can support the patient. And there was a bunch of juice on the counter that said no preservatives. And I said, "Well, can she drink that?" And she's like, "Well, you could try, but she probably will hate it." So I filled it with ice. I took it upstairs and she drank it. And it was as if you had given pop to like a 3-year-old for the first time. Her eyes lit up and we had this moment. And I went back to work, and I was so upset and I was crying and I was like, this is so sad. Like, she can't eat and drink what she wants, and her family's suffering because they just want her to live. And I remembered something that I had learned early on in my career about the importance of a small victory. So
Mm.
a small victory is something that we could pull out. So anytime I'm having a tough day, whether it's 1 minute or 5 minutes, I'll sit in my me space and I'll say, Nadine, where is the small victory? Find it, find it, find it. And that red juice at that moment in time was that small victory. So I think we do this work because, of course, it's difficult. And of course, we sit in suffering every single day. But I approach all of my patients as if they're my teachers. And when you do that, you have the humility to learn from them. And when you learn from them, you end up getting a lot more than you give. And celebrating those small victories is what pushes me forward. I'm not a fan of the word resilience. I feel as if it's just something that's just been told that we have to do because people don't actually want to, we don't have like equal rights, equal pay, all that stuff. So it's just throw on resilience. But I feel like it helps us move through when we can celebrate those small victories, when we can find our purpose and keep ourselves grounded in our why. That's really important. And I think I say the same to my teams. What are your small victories? We host wisdom circles where we come together and we have a safe space and we share wisdom around experiences, around challenges, around how we move through things together. And I think that's so important. So I think that, having your peers, opening up space, having an open door policy is so important, where my door's always open. Anybody can always come and talk to me about anything. And we just open that space. And I think opening space for self reflection is really, really important.
No, I think that's so beautiful. And I think that's one of the things I admire most about palliative care. It's the fact that it is so holistic and things are not rush, 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 where you, like, just the way you say it, like sitting at outside and just being able to take the time, right?
Mhm.
That to do things in a beautiful way, everything to be that light. Sometimes in other areas of medicine, I think it's your analogy of the candle is running around and it's just flickering and not
Yeah.
quite all there, or not able to show up in the same way that you're showing up. And it's coming through in the comments. I can't read all the comments, and people are like, wow, and they have chills. So people are feeling the light. So we have some comments on Instagram. I don't want to ignore the Instagram folks. So I know Liani Learns came back with like the issue on health equity or on equity, and said like comments or my, I guess, to do with like microaggressions and being a mixed bag, can show like from the dominant culture a lack of knowledge, but it is not always the oppressed person's role to always educate others. And that is definitely true. I
Yeah.
think some of us, like myself, it's part of our job to educate others. So it's okay. But if it's not your job, then you don't have to carry that. Absolutely. Mathania had a question. What are some of the challenges you face when having those difficult conversations, specifically for end of life care in young versus senior populations?
Yeah, such a beautiful question. I think that, when you look at death on two different spectrums, it's like so interesting to see because like when I'm supporting like a younger person that's dying, often they're grieving a future that never happened. And when you're supporting somebody who's like, in their 80s or 90s, like often they're grieving the life that did happen. And you're just in these two different phases of trying to like make sense of like what the future is going to hold. And I think that in both spaces, it's so beautiful. So I think that, when you're sitting with a young adult and you're just talking, or even an elderly or even a senior, and you're talking about end of life care, like these are difficult questions. And they're purposeful questions and they're meaningful questions. And I think that we don't have to have all of the answers. So sometimes we just have, there's this innate need to always have the answer. When a lot of the time when someone's asking, I think, we prognosticate the best that we can. And sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. Or people get asked, like, what happens after death? Like, I wish I knew. I have no clue. And we kind of like, we have to have the humility to say, to know what we know and know what we don't know. And I often like, I think it's so important for the people that we serve to lead the conversations that we have. Because when they lead the conversation and they're in the driver's seat, that's actually patient-centered care. In healthcare, we strive ourselves on saying we're patient centered, but are we really? When I look at long term care where people are so task oriented and it's like, no, you have to do this on this day and have to eat at this time. Is that patient centered care? I don't really know, or I don't think so. So, patient centered care is like, how do we actually have the people that we serve leading and understanding that those conversations are going to be difficult? They will always be difficult. But when we think of the why as to why we're having those conversations, it grounds us in a place of knowing we're often talking about the future of uncertainty, and uncertainty brings fear, and fear brings a whole other host of emotions. But I think we have to find ways of doing these conversations in bite sizes. So you don't do it all at once, finding the right time. So often, like those conversations can never be built on my schedule or when I'm ready to go in and talk about death and dying and funeral arrangements and advanced care planning. It has to be driven by the family and when they're ready. Because what you'll often notice is if it's not the right time, you won't get anywhere. So I think flexibility is really important when having difficult conversations. Authenticity is really important with difficult conversations. Good communications, being direct, being transparent, and really, really taking a back seat to say, you're my teacher. Tell me what's important to you. Switching the narrative from what's wrong with you to what's happening to you, that really trauma informed language, looking how their past experiences may impact the way this conversation is going because we serve so many people that have trauma that we know nothing about. So how do we kind of learn about that trauma and understand how it may be impacting the way this conversation is going right now? So really taking the time to get to know the person to actually care for the person.
No, I think that is, I love particularly, and I know that there's lots of questions, guys. I'm going to come to the question, but I just want to comment and jump in there because what you just said about person centered really struck me. We say person centered or patient centered, but oftentimes it's not. Again, I say as physicians, I'm not speaking about palliative care physicians, but we're known for interrupting people within the first 6 seconds, right? Like, oh, how can I help you? And then the patient says something, and then we're like in there because we know and we interrupt. And I can say, and it's very personal, but So you're not my father's palliative care physician, but you do work at the center where my father's in long-term care. And I remember, when my mom suddenly passed away, which was last year on her way to see my dad, it was very sudden and we weren't expecting it. And I didn't know, what to do. You can be a physician. It doesn't matter when it's real life and it's happening to you. And we had to decide if my dad, who has severe dementia, should be present at my mom's funeral and how to tell him. And that was like the most powerful example that I have of you saying, okay, well, we'll approach him, and then, you know what I mean, take our cues from him. And my brother was there, and in that moment we told dad with severe dementia that my mom, his wife, had passed, and asked him if he wanted to come to the funeral. And I think I can see from like your body language, you do remember that moment. But that was one of his most lucid moments, where he thanked God for all that they had. I'm like gonna cry. I don't care. I'm gonna tell the story anyways. And he said he's going to be there. Like, he really sat up and said, I will be there. And that was your approach, right? That you lent to us, that you've learned, but I had never seen anything like that. And then later he was less lucid, but in that moment, it was like a very spiritually, emotionally sharp moment, and where he took the wheel, And also it felt like, wow, like in that moment, that's how my father speaks. That's how I know my father, right? Despite the dementia. And so I have to say, like, what you learn and what you bring is very powerful, and something that we lack in other areas of healthcare and medicine. And so I have utmost respect for those of you working in palliative care to do that meaningful work. So I'm incredibly grateful, but also I just want to say I witnessed it, firsthand, how we can actually be patient-centered. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. You know that it literally gave me goosebumps, and it brought tears because I remember that moment, and I remember you calling me, because your mom was one of the lights of Kensington, and she was just one of the most beautiful person I've ever met. And I remember when you called me, it felt as if someone had kicked me in the stomach. I was like, this couldn't have happened. How? Like, she was so healthy and so, like, you could. It just didn't make sense. And I remember we had this moment and we had no idea what we were going to walk into and how this was going to all go. And you and your brother were just so beautiful that, often, like, it's not really us, it's the energy of what people bring in that room. And that room had such a beautiful energy that I think was filled with your mom's presence. Where when your dad just said, he started talking about all they had done together, all of our shoulders went down. And it was like, it was his moment for him to just lead. And I remember sitting there, and I remember after I said, I'm going to give you guys your moment. And I walked out of that room and I thought, the power of love can surpass any illness. It doesn't matter if you're living with years of dementia. When your love is so beautiful and so pure and so deep, it surpasses that and it trumps it. And that was a moment. And I remember being at your mom's funeral, and your dad was just so lucid. I remember, like, just looking at him, and he just looked so pleasantly, like, there was no, it was as if the dementia had left for a little bit. And it was just so beautiful. And I think, I always remember your mom and dad with an ice cream walking up and down Brunswick. And it was the most beautiful moment every time you saw them walking down that sidewalk, because, people often say, like, nobody ever says, first of all, I can't wait to retire and move into long-term care. Nobody says that. And no, very few people say, I want to work in long-term care, right? It's not sexy medicine, long-term care, palliative care. But when you're able to witness the love, like what your parents shared, that grounds your why as to how beautiful is it to be able to honor yourself, to know you witnessed a love that deep. You won't see that in any other sector. And I think that working with seniors gives you that experience. When you see people that have loved and, like, lived together and been married for that many years, you're like, this is what life is about. It's about that love that people share. And I think that was such a beautiful moment that will stay with me forever.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, no, it was a difficult time, but definitely there was beauty and love in it. And it was really, again, like, I thank you for helping to advise in that moment.
Thank you.
That being said, you said you can, we're like 10 minutes over and we still have lots of questions. So I needed to jump in there because of that patient centered, because it just struck me when you said it. But we have other questions. So are you game?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
okay, all right. So let's go into to the questions we have here. Oh, okay. So learning from patients, I love this because you mentioned that earlier. So Yursky had a question. Like, what do you most commonly hear patients in end? What do you commonly hear from patients in end of life care? What wisdom do they pass or share? I think Yursky says, if any, but I'm sure they do. So, yeah, any things that strike you as far as wisdom, as far as anything that you've learned? I'm sure you've learned lots, but top of mind?
Yeah, I think, I drive in from Brampton to downtown Toronto every day for work, and traffic is really bad. But when you walk into the hospice and you see somebody that is like, oh, Nadine, I was able to walk out to the garden today, it puts things into perspective. The things that often bring us the most angst and the most anger is so trivial. And, if you're healthy and you're housed and you have food and you have social supports and you have health care, you're privileged
Yeah.
to have these things, right? And when you're sitting at someone's bedside and you realize that what really matters are your friends, your family, feeling the sun on your face, laughing with the people that you love. It's not where we spend most of our time and energy on the things that don't matter. So, like, now I say to myself, Nadine, is this going to matter in a week, in a day, in a month? If it's not, you got to let it go. Because, life goes so fast. And when you're sitting at the bedside of someone who's dying, it really flashes like, what's important to me? What is purposeful for me? How do I want to live out the rest of my life so that I don't have regrets saying, I wish I had done this and I could have done this and I would have done this. And I think that's so important. I was with a woman one time, a patient in her house, and her husband was her caregiver, and he went into the hospital suddenly and he died.
Mm.
And she was at home dying. And I was sitting with her. And as I'm sitting with her at home in her hospital bed, her phone is going off the hook. And she picks up her phone and she says to me, Nadine, do not ever let people think just because they're calling your phone or texting you that they have connected with you. What you're doing here with me right now is connection. This isn't connection. And I think when I think of that, how often do we feel connected to people because we see them on Instagram or we see them on TikTok or we send them a text message and it's like, yeah, I spoke to them. We cannot forget the power of human connection and making time for the people and the things that we love. And that example stays with me so often because it's like you need human connection, you need human touch. You can't just fill it with a void of like social media or being on a phone. And you really have to take time to travel, to do those things that bring you meaning and purpose, and like prioritize that to ensure that you don't live your life wishing you did when you no longer can.
No, I think that's so key, and I love the it is a reminder. We need to be reminded regularly because the pandemic was our moment to remember
True.
how important human connection is and to focus on what's
Yeah.
important. And I feel like we've already forgotten. We just want to go back to, status quo. So thank you for so learning from your patients isn't just really like one in particular thing. It's again, it's walking your talk. You are living differently because you've been at their bedside at the end of life. And I think that is amazing. Tulsi T says here, do you think our healthcare system is adequately equipped on a cultural standpoint when it comes to palliative care? How can we support it to be more so? Hmm.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think our healthcare system, I think that okay, so I think our healthcare system, we need to do
Sorry.
better.
I'm like, yeah, you're trying to choose your words. I'm like,
You ever clean
our
up the
healthcare
coffee? You just
system.
know clean up the coffee. So I think that we need to do better. And I think that, a lot of people say, I'm culturally competent. Do not say you're culturally competent. Take it off your resume. Stop saying it. So, competency is I went to school for 25 years to be competent in palliative care. I have earned my way to say I am an expert in palliative care. That is competency. How can you be competent in culture when it is so dynamic, it is so individualized, it is so based on experiences? So, I actually love to say that I'm culturally incompetent because it means teach me. Tell me what I need to do to
Mm.
understand you better. So when we move from cultural competency to cultural humility, we actually are able to say, tell me what's important to you. And then the concept of cultural safety, where we understand how the systems that we live in have made our healthcare system oppressive and many other things. So when we understand cultural safety and cultural humility, we work towards making our system more equitable. So I think we have a long way to go. I do think we're headed there. I see a lot of work being done, especially with Indigenous peoples and a lot of huge leaders in this country. Shout out to Holly Prince, who does great work in Indigenous care, and many other people in this in our country and stuff that do work to really ensure that the work that we do is culturally safe. But I think we have a long way to go. I think that anybody that's saying cultural competency, we need to start really saying, do not say that anymore. Let's rewind that. Let's reframe that, because it actually holds a lot of it can be really problematic. And what it causes is just these stereotypes of being like, oh, I'm so competent, I know that person, I've seen this before, I understand that culture, when people's culture is often so different because of the life experiences that they lived. So I think our healthcare system is getting there. I think we have a long way to go. But I think that when I think of, we do this work so that the generations that come after us, little by little, we make it easier. And our job is to ensure that little by little, we're breaking down those barriers and addressing those challenges to ensure that we are making our healthcare system more equitable, more inclusive, more diverse, and more culturally safe.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I love that. And that's it. We're in Canada, we are early on our journey, but at least we're on the journey. But there's so much that needs to be done. And I love what you said about having that humility and saying, actually, I'm culturally incompetent. I think that makes sense, and having just being open and curious. So I love it. Thank you for sharing that. So we got comments. Candle quote was powerful, powerful stories. Mr. M.S. File. Thank you for this session. Christy Williams said, thank you both for this conversation and being vulnerable. Oh, I think it's in reference to what we were talking about with my mom and my dad. Thank you for paving the way for creating future compassionate physicians. And I hope physicians and healthcare workers broadly. Let me see if there's other questions. It's a lot of shout outs, like helpful to
Oh,
hear. I love the what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you mentality. Oh, there was an Oprah book on trauma, on that and trauma. Too many gems, have to rewatch this, is what Tulsi T said. And so yeah, just there are thank yous from Yursky, from Tulsi T. So I think we have if we got through all of the questions. I had one last question for you, and I'm going to make it kind of doubled in its approach, because I know that a lot of people who watch healthcare differently are thinking about medicine, but I feel like for a lot of us growing up, like medicine, like being a doctor was the only thing that we heard about. And so the world does need doctors. We need doctors, we need family doctors. There's no question, but we need people in all different fields to bring their gifts and perspectives and skill sets into healthcare. So my question to you is, like, what advice do you have for the young person who is feeling that calling in their heart that maybe healthcare is the path for them? So I mean, healthcare broadly, but they don't
mhm.
know what exactly they want to do. What is your advice for that young person?
Yeah, I think we don't have to get it right the first time. You don't have to know right in that moment what you want to do, where you want to go, and how it's going to end, because the journey, we're all still on our journey in our careers. We're all still moving through and figuring it out. And I think it's exactly that. It's a journey. And it is not a destination. And you may land and then you may move. So I think that, if you're thinking about healthcare, figure out your why. What is your purpose? What grounds you? Because, most people, like, yeah, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be an engineer, because that's what people think success is. But what really is your why? What grounds you? What gives you meaning and purpose every day? What can make you get up in the morning or on a Sunday night and say, I can't wait to go to work and do this work? And I think it's so important to figure out your why. I think it's so important to figure out that, you may apply for a program and you don't get in, but setbacks are not failure. They're often the foundation of which success is built. And just because one door doesn't open doesn't mean that another one isn't waiting for you. And I think that if you can be flexible in your journey, if you can be, really open and true and honest to yourself, and if you can really take moments to say, is this what I want? And you may start it and be like, this isn't what I want. And it's powerful to say, this isn't what I want, but I think I know what it is. Speak to people that are in it, that are doing it, that have done it. There's no point in having to reinvent the wheel when you have people like us that have been through the system and been through it. Like, we're here to share, we're here to learn. And I think, there's so much value in lived experience that I think we can help so many others. So I think really connect with people and ask them, what were your experiences like? What made you want to do this? This is what I'm thinking. And I think it really helps. And I think when whatever you do, don't lose yourself and lead with compassion. I've been a healthcare leader now the majority of my career has been in healthcare leadership. And I strive every single day to ensure that I lead with compassion and not empathy. I lead with compassion because we have to be compassionate in the work that we do. And we just can't care about the patients that we serve. We have to care about the people that we lead, the future generations, the students that are coming through our door. And I think so, no matter what you do and no matter how hard it could be, we have all the systemic issues and all the systemic barriers and our own, you know, setbacks that we all have and the way we look and the color of our skin, but we also all have what Peggy McIntosh would call an invisible backpack of privilege. And what's in our invisible backpack of privilege, and how do we use that to propel us forward? And how do we use those setbacks to get us where we want to go? So I think if healthcare is for you, pursue it. Find out where you want to be, what you want to do, and just keep going with it. Be flexible, be open. Failure is always success. Reach out, get advice, and just really enjoy the journey because it's a ride. You learn so much. And I think it's been one of the best experiences of my life.
Oh my God, I love that. I love that. And finding your why, I think, is so important, and the purpose and letting that guide you. I love and I know, so, we're gonna wrap up in a moment, right? I actually stole more of your time than I had anticipated, but the questions were great. Thanks everybody for your questions. Folks can follow you. Your Instagram is public, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Dr.
Yes.
Nadine Persaud.
All right. So Dr. Nadine Persaud, because I love the information and vibes, and also just vibes and humor and everything that you bring on
Thank
Instagram.
you.
So y'all can follow Dr. Nadine there, to find out more and learn more, and also have the sprinkles of joy that she brings to the social media space. So thank you very, very much, Dr. Persaud. It was fantastic having you. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's such an honor to spend time with you. You are one of my people. Like, there's people that I look up to in life, and you're one of them. I think you're inspirational. I think that what you're doing here is so beautiful. And for you to be taking time, you have kids, like you have a family, and for you to be doing this on a Tuesday or a Tuesday after night, it just shows your passion and commitment to our community. And I think we need more people like you. It's a pleasure to do this for you. It's an honor. And thank you, everyone, for all the questions. And yeah, I loved being here. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you. All right. So I'm grateful for your Dr. Persaud, and I really encourage you folks to follow the work that she does on social media. Next week, we have another guest who's really big on social media, Dr. Kwadwo Kariamantang. So Dr. K will be with us discussing the topic of solving healthcare. So that's his platform, and yeah, it's gonna be fun. Thank you for watching tonight, and follow us on social media as well. Sign up for our newsletter on healthcaringdifferently.com. And otherwise, I will see you next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you and good night.